Welcome back to Long Listen, a place where we don't rush through ideas, we live inside them for a while. This channel isn't about quick summaries or productivity hacks you'll forget tomorrow. If you'd rather think deeply than scroll quickly, you're in the right place. You open your phone to reply to one message. Just one. You tell yourself it'll take 10 seconds. 40 minutes later, you're still there, scrolling through videos you don't remember choosing, reading opinions you didn't ask for, feeling slightly tired, slightly anxious, and vaguely dissatisfied. When you finally put the phone down, a strange question lingers. Did I decide to do this, or did something inside me decide first? David Eagleman's The Brain. The story of you begins exactly at this uncomfortable gap between what we think we control and what actually controls us. The book's most unsettling claim is simple. You are not the pilot of your brain. You are the outcome of it. Eagleman doesn't say this to make you feel powerless. He says it because neuroscience keeps pointing to the same fact. Long before you are aware of a decision, your brain has already started moving. Experiments show that neural activity predicting a choice appears hundreds of milliseconds, even up to a few seconds in some studies, before people report deciding. By the time you feel certain, I chose this, your brain has already voted. Consciousness, in this view, isn't the CEO. It's the spokesperson, stepping in after the deal is done to explain why it makes sense. Your inner narrator is less a decision-maker and more a press secretary. This explains why so much of daily life feels contradictory. You promise yourself to eat better, then reach for sugar when stressed. You plan to sleep early, then binge one more episode. You genuinely believe you value focus, yet constantly check notifications. These aren't moral failures. They're negotiations between competing neural systems, ancient survival circuits, emotional drives, habit loops, and a rational voice that arrives late and tries to sound confident. The brain is not one unified self. It is a crowded room of voices arguing for control. What makes this insight especially relevant today is that the modern world is very good at talking directly to the older, faster parts of your brain. Social media doesn't persuade your logic. It hijacks your reward system. Notifications don't ask for your consent. They trigger reflexes shaped for predators and food scarcity. Your brain, designed for a world of immediate threats and slow change, is now immersed in endless stimulation and constant comparison. You are running ancient neural software in a hyper-optimized digital environment. Understanding this doesn't strip you of agency. It reframes it. You may not choose your impulses, but you can choose the environments that shape them. And that shift, from blaming yourself to redesigning your conditions, is where the brain quietly begins to change how you see your life. You've probably seen it before. You open YouTube and the algorithm serves you a title in all caps. You have no free will. The thumbnail looks serious, the comments are on fire, and somewhere inside, you feels both intrigued and slightly annoyed. People argue back and forth, some relieved, some angry, some declaring that nothing matters anymore. This is usually where most creators stop. They drop the bomb, enjoy the chaos, and move on. But Eagleman doesn't do that. He isn't interested in trolling your sense of agency. He's interested in what comes after the shock wears off. Yes, neuroscience shows that the brain starts gearing up for decisions before we're consciously aware of them. The wiring is already firing before you feel like you've chosen. But Eagleman's real question is quieter and more uncomfortable. If that's true, how should we design our lives, our systems, and our societies differently? Instead of obsessing over whether free will is an illusion, he shifts the focus to something more useful. Control doesn't disappear. It changes location. Think about it like this. You don't consciously decide to crave sugar at 11 p.m. The urge just shows up. But you did decide, earlier that day, what kind of food you keep in your kitchen. You didn't choose to feel distracted by notifications, but you did choose whether your phone sleeps next to your bed. Eagleman's point is subtle but powerful. We don't control impulses directly. We control the environments that give those impulses power. This is where his thinking diverges sharply from the more fatalistic interpretations of neuroscience. If the conclusion were simply, "You have no control," the book would end in despair. Instead, Eagleman argues that understanding the brain's limits gives us better leverage. When you stop pretending that willpower is infinite, you stop blaming yourself for failing tests you were never built to pass. And once the shame fades, something interesting happens. Design replaces guilt. You move from asking, "Why am I so weak?" to, "Why did I set this up to fail?" He extends this logic beyond personal habits into morality and justice. If behavior emerges from brain states shaped by genetics, trauma, and environment, then punishment alone makes less sense than we like to believe. That doesn't mean no consequences. It means shifting focus from pure punishment to smarter prevention, from moral outrage to designing systems that produce better outcomes. Instead of asking who deserves blame, Eagleman asks what conditions produce better outcomes. Responsibility, in this view, isn't about fault. It's about future influence. This way of thinking also reframes identity. If you are not a single stable decision maker, but a constantly updating process, then consistency becomes less about character and more about structure. You don't become disciplined by trying harder. You become disciplined by reducing friction for the behaviors you want and increasing friction for the ones you don't. That's not self-deception. It's self-knowledge. Knowing how the brain works doesn't make you less human. It makes you more strategic about being human. What makes Eagleman especially relevant for young people today is that he implicitly addresses a modern crisis. We're judging ancient brains by modern standards. We expect constant focus, emotional regulation, and rationality in environments engineered to exploit distraction and impulse. When we fail, we assume something is wrong with us. Eagleman flips that assumption. Maybe the problem isn't your brain. Maybe it's the world you dropped it into. By the end of this part of the book, the question is no longer, "Do I have free will?" It's, "Where can I realistically intervene?" And that shift, from metaphysical debate to practical responsibility, is what makes the brain not depressing, but quietly empowering. If part 1 unsettles you and part 2 reframes responsibility, then this part goes even deeper. It quietly changes how you trust your own experience. One of Eagleman's most radical ideas is not just that your brain decides before you're aware, but that the world you think you're seeing is not the world itself. It's your brain's best guess. You don't see the world as it is. You experience your brain's best guess at the world, a continuous simulation built on predictions, constantly updated when new data rolls in. This matters more than it sounds. Your brain doesn't wait for reality and then copy it like a camera. That would be far too slow. Instead, it predicts what should be out there, then quickly corrects itself when errors appear. Vision, sound, even your sense of time, all of it is inference layered on expectation. Reality, as you experience it, is a controlled hallucination. Most of the time, the hallucination works well enough that you never notice. But under stress, fatigue, or information overload, the cracks start to show. Think about anxiety. You're sitting in a cafe, physically safe, coffee in hand. Nothing is actually wrong, and yet your heart is racing, your thoughts spiral, and your brain starts scanning for threats. A strange comment from a coworker replays in your head. A headline you saw earlier suddenly feels personal. This isn't a weakness. Its prediction has gone wild. Your brain didn't evolve to tell you the truth. It evolved to keep you alive. When it senses uncertainty, it biases perception toward danger, because historically, false alarms were cheaper than missed threats. This is why social media is so destabilizing for young people. Platforms constantly feed the brain ambiguous signals: outrage, comparison, conflict, urgency. Your predictive system interprets this as meaningful threat data. You're not addicted because you lack discipline. You're trapped in a feedback loop where the brain keeps updating its model of reality based on distorted input. If you constantly consume danger signals, your brain will assume you live in a dangerous world. Doomscrolling fits perfectly into this framework. You don't scroll because you enjoy it. You scroll because your brain is trying to resolve uncertainty. Each swipe promises resolution. Maybe the next post will explain what's going on. It almost never does. Instead, the model grows darker, more chaotic, more threatening. The simulation becomes heavier, even if your physical surroundings stay the same. Impulse buying works the same way. One-click purchases on Amazon don't appeal to logic. They exploit prediction and reward. The brain simulates relief. This will solve something, before the package even arrives. That small dopamine spike isn't about the object. It's about the brain temporarily stabilizing its internal model. Consumption becomes a way to quiet prediction error, not a response to real need. But here's where Eagleman refuses to let the story turn hopeless. The brain is not fixed. It is live-wired. Neuroplasticity means your brain is constantly reshaping itself based on what it repeatedly does, sees, and expects. The simulation isn't permanent, it's trainable. Every habit, every environment, every repeated behavior nudges the model in a new direction. You don't just live in a world, you are slowly building the brain that interprets it. This explains why prolonged anxiety feels so convincing. The brain learns that threat is the default. It tunes perception accordingly. Neutral events become suspicious. Silence feels ominous. But the reverse is also true. Safety, predictability, and meaning can be learned, not instantly, not easily, but structurally. You don't argue anxiety away. You retrain the system generating it. Eagleman's insight here is quietly radical. If perception is prediction, then changing what you feed the brain changes what feels real. This doesn't mean think positive. It means respecting that the brain updates based on evidence, not intention. Sleep, movement, social contact, information diet, digital boundaries, these are not lifestyle hacks. They are inputs shaping the simulation you wake up inside every morning. Mental health is not just emotional, it is architectural. This also reframes identity in a profound way. If your sense of self is part of the brain's ongoing story, then identity isn't something you find. It's something that stabilizes over time through repeated patterns. You become who your brain predicts you are. That can sound terrifying, but it's also an opening, because predictions can be updated, slowly, imperfectly, but reliably. And this brings us back to the punchline that refuses to go away. Your brain didn't evolve for truth. It evolved for survival. In a world of constant stimulation, algorithmic persuasion, and social comparison, survival signals are everywhere. Anxiety isn't a personal flaw. It's a mismatch between ancient prediction machinery and modern inputs. The tragedy isn't that your brain lies to you. It's that you were never taught how much influence you have over the data it learns from. Eagleman doesn't promise mastery over the mind. He offers something more realistic: awareness of the system you're already running. And once you see that perception is a simulation, plastic and responsive, the question quietly shifts again. From, "What's wrong with me?" to, "What kind of brain am I training every single day?" Once you start seeing the brain the way Eagleman describes it, not as a command center, but as a layered, predictive system, you begin to notice a pattern across many of the most influential books people keep recommending to each other. They aren't arguing as much as they're standing at different points along the same slope. A slope that runs from how the mind works to how much control we really have, to what responsibility even means under those limits. What the brain does exceptionally well is sit in the middle of that slope, quietly connecting ideas that are usually discussed in isolation. At the most accessible end of this spectrum is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking, Fast and Slow. Almost everyone has encountered its core idea, even if they don't remember the names: System 1 and System 2. Fast and automatic versus slow and deliberate. Instinct versus reflection. Kahneman shows that most of what we call thinking is actually quick pattern recognition, emotional shortcuts, and mental habits running in the background. Conscious reasoning exists, but it's lazy and easily tired. This is the gentle introduction to cognitive humility. You're not irrational because you're broken. You're irrational because that's how the system was built. Eagleman builds directly on this foundation, but he takes it further. Where Kahneman maps the mental terrain, Eagleman zooms into the machinery. He shows that these systems aren't just abstract modes of thought. They're physical networks competing for influence. The brain isn't switching between fast and slow like gears. It's constantly negotiating between subsystems with different evolutionary goals. Once you see this, self-judgment starts to soften. You stop asking why you're inconsistent and start asking which system was loudest at that moment. Move further along the slope and you reach Robert Sapolsky's Behave. This is where optimism begins to thin. Sapolsky doesn't just talk about brain systems. He traces behavior backward through hormones, childhood environment, stress, culture, and evolutionary history. The picture becomes almost overwhelming. Every action seems overdetermined by layers of causes stacked long before conscious choice enters the scene. It's here that many readers start to feel the ground slip. If biology, hormones, trauma, and culture stack the deck so high, then where the hell does me even fit in? Eagleman doesn't deny this weight. In fact, he agrees with most of it. But where Behave can feel like a closing argument against free agency, the brain quietly shifts the question. Instead of asking whether you are free in some absolute sense, Eagleman asks where intervention still makes sense. The answer is rarely in the moment of impulse. It's upstream, in education, policy, architecture, habit formation, and social systems. Responsibility moves from the individual decision to the design of the conditions around it. Push the slope even further, and you arrive at Sam Harris's free will, the most uncompromising position of all. Harris argues that free will, as most people understand it, simply does not exist. Thoughts arise unbidden. Choices emerge from causes we didn't choose. The sense of authorship is an illusion layered on top. For some, this is liberating. For others, it feels like existential collapse. If no one truly chooses, praise and blame start to look arbitrary. Meaning itself seems threatened. This is the point where many creators stop. The conclusion feels dramatic and final. You are not in control. But Eagleman refuses to end here. He accepts neuroscience without adopting despair. He acknowledges the illusion without surrendering to it. Instead, he reframes freedom not as absolute authorship, but as influence over future states. You may not choose your thoughts, but you can shape the brain that will have them tomorrow. And this is where Viktor Frankl enters the picture, almost as a counterweight. Man's search for meaning stands at the far end of the slope, not because it denies biology, but because it speaks from within extreme constraints. Frankl doesn't claim unlimited freedom. He claims something smaller, and therefore more believable: the freedom to choose one's attitude toward unavoidable suffering. Even when choice is stripped down to almost nothing, orientation still matters. Meaning survives not because we are unconstrained, but because we are conscious of being constrained. Seen together, these books form a coherent map rather than a debate. Kahneman shows that conscious control is limited. Sapolsky shows that behavior is deeply conditioned. Harris shows that free will, as commonly imagined, collapses under scrutiny. Frankl shows that meaning persists anyway. Eagleman connects them by changing the scale of the question. Freedom isn't about initiating actions out of nothing. It's about shaping the systems, internal and external, that generate those actions over time. This is why the most important line doesn't sound philosophical at all. It sounds practical, almost mundane. Even if you didn't choose your brain, you still choose the environment it swims in. That sentence carries more hope than any motivational slogan, because it doesn't deny reality, it works with it. It accepts limitations without surrender. It asks not for heroism in the moment, but wisdom in preparation. In a culture obsessed with instant decisions, this is a radical shift. Your life isn't built on heroic moments of willpower. It's built on the quiet, repeated tweaks you make to the systems around you, day after day. And once you see that, the conversation moves beyond pessimism or optimism. It becomes something more grounded, a question of stewardship. Not, am I free? But what kind of future brain am I quietly building right now? If the earlier parts quietly dismantle the myth of total self-control, this is where the question becomes unavoidable. What does responsibility even mean in a world that knows your brain better than you do? Eagleman spends a lot of time discussing the justice system, how brain tumors, trauma, or damaged impulse control complicate blame and punishment. But for a younger generation, the courtroom isn't where this dilemma shows up. It shows up in your pocket. It shows up in your feed. It shows up every time an algorithm predicts what will keep you scrolling. Open TikTok when you're tired or lonely. You don't search for sadness. You don't type, "make me feel worse." And yet, within minutes, the content shifts. More breakups. More existential jokes. More quiet despair disguised as humor. The algorithm doesn't hate you. It doesn't even know you exist. It just wants your eyes glued. And when you're tired or lonely, engagement means feeding the spiral. And engagement, for a stressed brain, often means intensity. When the system learns you're vulnerable, it doesn't pull you out. It pulls you deeper. This is where the old language of responsibility starts to feel outdated. Telling someone to just log off is like telling a dehydrated person to stop wanting water. The brain is doing what it was built to do: follow reward signals, resolve uncertainty, reduce discomfort. The algorithm is doing what it was built to do: maximize time and attention. The collision between the two is not a moral failure. It's a design problem. If you lose a fight you were never meant to win, the question isn't why you're weak, it's why the arena is shaped this way. AI takes this one step further. Recommendation systems don't just react to behavior, they anticipate it. Shopping platforms surface products when your impulse control is lowest. Writing assistants suggest upgrades when your motivation dips. Even tools meant to help can quietly steer desire. The more these systems learn, the less they need your conscious participation. You don't choose, you approve. The brain doesn't collapse under AI, it collaborates with it. So when you scroll for 2 hours longer than planned, what exactly happened? Did you choose that? Or did a system optimized for prediction learn how to keep your ancient neural machinery just stimulated enough to never quite disengage? This isn't a trick question. It's the central ethical tension of our time. Responsibility doesn't disappear, but it shifts away from individual moments toward collective design. Eagleman's framework helps here. In his view, holding people responsible doesn't mean pretending they operate in a vacuum. It means acknowledging causation while still shaping future outcomes. Applied to technology, this means asking harder questions than, why can't users control themselves? It means asking why systems are built to exploit cognitive vulnerabilities in the first place. It means rethinking defaults, incentives, and feedback loops. Justice, in the age of algorithms, is less about blame and more about architecture. But this isn't only a policy-level issue. It's personal too, just not in the way self-help culture frames it. You don't reclaim agency by summoning more willpower. You reclaim it by moving the decision point earlier, before the urge, before the scroll, before the click. The most powerful choices happen when your brain is calm, not when it's already compromised. This is where small, almost boring changes become revolutionary. Not because they show discipline, but because they change the system your brain operates in. Deleting an app isn't a weakness, it's boundary setting. Leaving your phone in another room at night isn't avoidance, it's foresight. Replacing endless feeds with long-form input, books, podcasts, conversations, doesn't make you superior. It gives your brain a different data set to learn from. You can't outthink a machine designed to exploit your reflexes, but you can starve it of access. What's often missed in discussions about AI and autonomy is that brains adapt quickly. When you change inputs, the simulation changes. The anxiety eases not because the world got safer, but because your predictive model stopped being flooded with threat signals. Focus improves not because you become disciplined, but because distractions lose their grip. Over time, the brain recalibrates. It always does. That's what neuroplasticity means in real life. Not dramatic transformation, but quiet reweighting of what feels normal. Eagleman's most hopeful insight is also the most demanding. Understanding removes excuses, but it also removes self-hatred. You are not broken for struggling in an environment engineered to overwhelm you. But once you see the mechanisms clearly, you can't unsee them. Awareness creates responsibility, not to fight your brain, but to protect it. So the question for our time isn't whether free will exists in some abstract sense. It's this: knowing how vulnerable the brain is to prediction and manipulation. What systems are we willing to accept? What defaults are we willing to live inside? And on a smaller scale, what environments are we choosing to wake up in every day? Because in a world run by algorithms, the most meaningful form of agency may not be choosing harder, but choosing where your brain is allowed to swim. By now, the story should feel less like a lecture about neuroscience and more like a mirror. Not a flattering one, but an honest one. The brain. The story of you doesn't tell you that you're powerless, and it doesn't promise that you can control everything if you just try harder. What it does is more uncomfortable and more useful. It asks you to stop pretending you're a fully independent mind, floating above biology, culture, and technology, and start seeing yourself as something more real, a living system shaped by inputs, feedback, and time. Eagleman never asks you to become the master of your brain. He knows that's a fantasy. Instead, he invites you to become its caretaker. Once you accept that your thoughts arise before permission, that perception is a simulation, and that modern systems are designed to exploit ancient wiring, the goal quietly changes. The question is no longer, why can't I control myself? It becomes, why did I design my life to make this so hard? That shift, from self-blame to system awareness, is where agency actually begins. This is especially important for a generation growing up inside algorithms. When attention is monetized, distraction is not a personal failure. It's a business model. When anxiety spreads faster than context, fear is not irrational. It's predictive. Seeing this clearly doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does explain why moralizing willpower has failed so many people. You don't need more discipline. You need better defaults. And better defaults don't start with grand resolutions. They start with small edits. The kinds of changes your future brain will thank you for, even if your present brain resists them. Editing doesn't feel heroic. It feels quiet, almost boring. But over time, it rewrites the simulation you live inside. So here's the idea worth carrying with you, long after this episode ends. You are not the author of your brain, but you are the editor of your life. Editing doesn't mean controlling every sentence. It means deciding what stays in the draft and what gets cut. It means choosing which influences get to shape you repeatedly and which ones lose their access. Let's make this concrete. Today, just today, try one thing. Look around and ask yourself, what is editing me right now? Which app has the most influence over your mood? Which people consistently shape how you see yourself? What kind of content are you feeding your brain every single day without questioning it? You don't have to change everything. Just notice. Awareness is the first edit. If this episode resonated, I'd love to hear from you. Comment and tell me, what environment is shaping you the most right now? An app, a habit, a relationship, or a feed? That conversation, right there, is already a small act of agency.